but then I was like, I know that guy Amos. And you were talking about the tree guy, and I was thinking there's another guy who lives near my house, and it's another side story. He knocked on my door one day, this older guy, and you might have seen him around the neighborhood. He's kind of known. I forget his name, but he is like the Johnny Appleseed of Alameda.
Oh, really?
This guy has planted hundreds of trees around Alameda that have grown into like big trees. He's been doing it for years. He's retired. I think he worked as a civil engineer for Oakland.
And he just decided to become...
City of Oakland. He did this on the side. And now he lives about 2 blocks away. So I actually know where he lives. I see him in the neighborhood. But he knocked on my door one day. And he was this guy in a 3-piece suit, like more like a waistcoat, tweed kind of jacket.
Okay.
Very kind of a
professorial
type guy, right? And he said, I had this big tree in my front garden, and he goes, I'm here to help cut your tree. I was like, what? he goes, yeah, well, I planted it 15 years ago, whatever. And I was like, really? Okay, sure enough. And actually, this is probably about 7 or 8 years ago that I met him on the doorstep. Now, the tree has grown fucking ridiculously, but it was getting to the point where it was just getting to the wires. So he went to trim it back a little bit.
Right.
And he had the tools. And I said, of course, man, I'll help you out, And I started to learn about this guy. And this is what he does. And he has trees all over Alameda. And he goes out in his spare time and he helps to prune them, trim them down. And these are his babies.
Oh, that's the sweetest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. And I think he's there's somebody that I know that knows him, and he's involved. He attends city hall meetings, but he's just a kind of I think he gets pulled into conversations every now and again on conservation and architectural preservation. That sort of thing.
Okay.
So he's on those kind of advisory boards, but not elected or anything.
Mm-hmm. Just passion.
And the guy's just a legend, He's just like in a small little like niche of Alameda.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd probably talk very well. Poor guy, he cut his hand when he was working about the tree in my garden.
Oh, goodness.
And I was like, come on, and I wrapped him up. And of course I said to him, well, you're not cutting any tree until we make a cup of tea.
Right.
I brought him in and gave him a cup of tea. Most people would say, get off my fucking lawn.
Right.
Who are you, right? But he was the guy, planted all the trees. He's a Johnny Appleseed, basically.
Oh, I definitely want to see if maybe he'll talk.
I could ask him, because I know this guy's got, but I have no idea what he would be like on...
But that's okay.
Yeah.
Some of that is the fun of doing
I mean, you can tease it out, right?
Yeah.
That's your job, right?
Yeah, exactly. Some of that is because I've been doing little pre-interviews with some people, but with Amos, he just came in and sat down and we just went for it.
Yeah.
And like I said, he just knows all of those. He just has that memory where he was pulling, you could see him think about something for a minute and be like, I'm just thinking of my slide, and then come out with all of the facts from it. Yeah. And probably because he's given those speeches so many times, or maybe it's just, he just knows his material. Yeah. And so it was really just interesting to sit and listen to that. And to learn, because I mean, some of those numbers and some of the things I've learned after talking to him about the disparity of the where money goes and why it goes there and just how it can affect neighborhoods, it was just shocking to me. The political kind of sad.
It's rigged.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to redlining. Yeah.
It's a different form of it, basically. But, same end result.
Yeah. Which is how much more redlining goes on that we don't even realize goes on. Yeah. Oh. All right. Well, ready to start?
Okay.
Hi, y'all. Well, we are already in it with Rory again here. Roaring. I just almost said chilling.
Rory Shields.
No, in my brain now, all of a sudden you're Kurt Schilling.
Schilling. I don't know if I want to be associated with him, but...
No, your sock's not bleeding?
Yeah.
We are here with Rory Shields for an evening with Rory. We are part of the Ducking Reality World, but we're going to be doing a couple of these where Rory and I sit down and talk about kind of his thoughts and opinions and what's going on in the world. So tonight we are talking all things Rory.
Well, thanks for having me back again. I really enjoyed the first experience being here, and it got pretty good traction in the community afterwards. A lot of people gave very nice compliments about how it sounded and how it went. So that was encouraging.
It was.
I think it's got us thinking. We got to kind of maybe think about expanding this or do a little bit more often. So I'm never short of something to say. So it's actually a kind of a good therapy for me to just come in and get it off my chest.
Yeah, this can be the place where you rant so you don't rant at people in the office or in the street.
It's a safe venue for ranting.
You can get your points all in order while you're out at the bar talking to the guys bullshitting, and then come here with your concise thoughts on the matters.
Well, and that's what I was telling a few people, that, we're trying to understand, well, what is that exactly? Or what are you asking me to listen to? And I was trying to explain to them, well, all the things that you hear me say every other week or for the last few years, it's all in one place. Yeah. And the beauty of it is no one's interrupting me. Except for Siobhan. That's her job to interrupt me. But,
yes.
When you're talking to somebody in a bar, you get 2 minutes or, 30 seconds, and then something happens on the TV and there's a score in the game, or somebody else wanders in, and then the thought is lost. Yes. So you don't get that continuity of discussion. So this is good in that respect.
It is.
Uninterrupted.
Uninterrupted, Rory. Okay. Where do you want to start tonight? We have some...
I was thinking about a couple of things. The last time that I spoke, I think that we kind of focused on, there was a little bit of a theme there.
Just us getting to know you and
but it was,
journey.
I think it was more around how I got here and what my experience was like coming into the US. It was kind of an immigrant story, right? I think that was the kind of theme, and there was a few other things popped up along the way.
Right.
But that was the kind of outlying kind of framework. But I think even in that discussion, there was a few things popped up, and we said, "Oh, that's for another day," right? Yes. One of the things that I'm very opinionated on, or I have a lot of ideas, where you want to look at it, is politics. I'm not active in politics at all. In fact, I would say I'm like apolitical, as best as one can be. I don't participate in any, political parties, or, I'm very much an observer.
Okay.
For want of a better description. But I've always been fascinated by politics, and politics not just, like in all different parts of the world. Like where I grew up, it was a topic that, was front and center in every household that I ever visited. And it was a kind of an Irish thing where, politics, the weather, and sport, those were the three big topics. If you could talk about any of those three things, you could do just fine in life wherever you went.
Right.
You'd have somebody that would welcome you in and engage you in a conversation. So those are good tools to have. But the politics side of it, from a young age, I would read a lot. I would, devour the Sunday newspapers for content, and I was just like a sponge. And I didn't need any prompting or any pushing to go and, have a look over here. I just had a natural kind of affinity for absorbing that kind of information, studying those kind of systems. So at a young age, I was reading books that were, probably adult books on those type of subjects. But also, I would watch very carefully, like overseas politics, even at a young age. I remember things, they were obviously big events, but I remember, like as a young, child, when, I can't remember the exact dates when this happened, but like say when Nixon resigned, right? I remember, I've got this visual image in my head of noticing it in the background in the TV, and adults were talking about it, and I'm like, oh, that's significant.
Right.
Fast forward many years later, and, we're still talking about those type of events where I live today, and the significance of them, and the parallels with other situations. So, that's an interesting, for me, kind of, fast forward situation where early thoughts have still have resonance today. So that was my kind of introduction. But everywhere I went, I've always been interested in the political structure, how it works, how it affects people, and how it's manipulated as well. I think I found in most cases, I would say I'm definitely a left leaning. A political viewpoint for the most part. That's a term that's misused, or can be misused, or it can be used as a slur against somebody, depending where you live or how you define that. Yeah. That doesn't make me a communist. It doesn't make me, a hardcore like Marxist or something. But I'm definitely on the left of the spectrum. But the left of the spectrum here would be on the right of the spectrum in Ireland, for example, right, or some European countries,
right? Because
the dial is very, very different.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So, when I say, I lean left, I would be very much like I believe in, kind of a social democracy type model. I think the best, probably most effective model that I see just from, what I know of today would be some of the Scandinavian models like Norway or, Sweden. And they're not without their problems, right. They're high tax, but they have, they like Norway's a country, Finland, I think, comes up with,
the happiest place
happiest place on the planet, right? You know,
Yeah.
and this is not like happy as in being in McDonald's with Ronald McDonald. This is like real happiness, right?
Right.
Where, you know, they just dominate that survey every year. They have, you know, fantastic social welfare systems. They have a, you know, cradle to grave safety net that's there, so people are comfortable. You know, they get free education, they get free childcare, free medical care.
Right.
They pay high taxes.
But wouldn't you pay high taxes if you got all of that?
Absolutely. And I've always said this, and people are like, "You're crazy." You know, why would you want to do that for? And that's the American concept. You know, like, that's my money. I'm not giving it away for them to abuse it or misspend it, or, you know, people didn't earn it to give it to them, right? I mean, there's a concept that's been bandied around for the last few years. It's a universal social, like, I think it's called a USC, or Universal Social Charge, Universal Social Credit.
Oh, yeah.
Where rather than like working, you just get a fixed income. That's it.
Yeah, the universal pay.
It's kind of universal pay, and it's been demoed. You know, it's been tried in a few places. It's actually even been tried. I think a couple of US cities have tried it on an experimental basis, and it's been proved to work pretty well. I mean, the administration of it, costs associated with it, are really low, so it's kind of a no questions asked. Here's your $1,500 a month.
Right.
Just don't come looking for more. Live your life and no questions asked, right?
Yeah.
But it's enough, you know, it's more than what you would get, you know, just on, you know, the kind of, the different programs that are run.
Like food stamps.
Like food stamps, or, yeah, exactly.
SNAP, or whatever they call it now.
Yeah.
Or
and those are difficult to administer, and those are abused in different ways as well. So, you know, that's an idea that hasn't gone away. And one of the things that comes up in conversation a lot is, you know, we're looking at the future of work. And, you know, you're looking at artificial intelligence, robotics. You know, right now unemployment is at like 4%. It's like the lowest ever in the US, right? So, yeah, there's plenty of work around, but a lot of those are, you know, making upbeat jobs, or they're, you know, low income jobs. A lot of people are working 3 jobs just to, you know, to get the income that one job should provide. And a lot of those jobs will disappear, because a lot of those jobs are replaceable. Although we haven't, you know, we've heard that before, but there's...
Well, we have seen it over the years.
We've seen it, and we've seen the cycles, definitely.
And it's just going to get worse.
Yes, it's definitely worrying, right?
Yeah.
But you have to have a solution for that, right? You can't just have 40% of the population unemployed, right?
Right.
You know, and then the rest of the population is doing pretty well. Like, you have to throw it back into the center and then spread it out, right? I mean, one of the biggest problems we have is income inequality, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm kind of veering all over the place right now, but we're going into different areas, like my observations. And it's if you study the history of it, like, the whole income inequality thing has just got exponentially worse.
Right.
And, you know, you talk about taxation models, especially taxation models on the wealthier people. Like, it's been completely inverted from what it was, you know, back in the 20s, pre-depression and everything else. Like, highest earners paid, you know, 80% tax on earnings, right?
Right.
And now it's gone the complete opposite, where they're paying less than, you know, the postman or the van delivery dude, right? So,
yeah, when the president spends less in taxes and he's a supposed millionaire than a waitress, there's a problem.
Exactly. And that's where it's gone. So, you know, it's gone too far the other way. So, you know, does it make sense to pay more taxes? Will I have a problem paying more taxes? Absolutely not. I mean, of course you want to get value for money. You want it to be well spent.
Right.
But you can't escape the notion that, you know, roads need to be built, schools need to be built and maintained, and education standards, you know, maintained as well, right? And improved. I mean, all those things funds have been taken away and they've diminished, and there's a real societal impact with that kicks in much later. I mean, the breakdown of society that occurs is directly linked to that. When you have no communities, when you don't have that social fabric there, that's when you have, you know, it starts to fall apart. And so you pay a price down the road.
Right.
And you have to understand that. Everybody's got to understand that. You got to put into the pot. You can, you know, minister it better, and you can have better guidelines around how it's spent, and you can, you know, cut back in waste and cut back in corruption and things like that. I mean, it's very doable. You just got to put the mechanisms in place. But this notion that you just, you know, no more taxes, or, you know, give tax breaks to the wealthy. No, it's a recipe for disaster in the long term.
Right. Yeah, because their trickle down economics does not work.
Never
It's
worked.
been shown over and over. And
It's a flawed
yeah.
theory, right? I mean, when it was popular in like the 80s, Reagan and Thatcher years, right? I mean, that was the cool thing. But it didn't work then, and it never worked since. So it's dead. I mean, you got to come up with something else,
right?
And you still hear it. It's the same philosophies are still there, right? And it's still very much in it's in Republican ideology, but it's also in Democratic ideology. And then, of course, we get into like U.S. politics. I mean, trying to break that apart is, it's a basket case in many respects. And I'm not here to bash the US, right?
Right.
I was listening to somebody else's podcast actually recently, a couple of days ago, and there was some renowned American author. I think his name is Richard Ford. I can't remember his name exactly, but he's a sports author, but he's also written a bunch of novels. And he was asked by an Irish guy, it's a bit of a shit show in the US right now, isn't it? And he went, no. But he said it from the point of view of, hey, that's my country,
Right.
Like, I know what his political leanings are, and his ideology. He wouldn't be happy with the state of affairs in the US. But at a certain point, you can't say that. You got to say, you know what? Yeah, there's definitely some massive problems here.
Right.
But we're all in it together, and we got to fix it, right? So that's the kind of way I look at it. I mean, right now, it's bad. It's been bad for a while. And it's not just one individual. It's not, just Donald Trump. He's only a symptom of the disease, right?
He's a huge symptom.
He's a huge symptom, and it's a bad symptom. I mean, he's a monster, like.
Right.
But, he's our monster. We created him, all of us collectively, right? So we allowed it to happen. And there was lots of warning signals, and there was lots of telltale signs, and there was danger there, and people didn't pay enough attention. People didn't get out and vote. People didn't look at the implications, right? I mean, one of the biggest things, and I remember telling people this at the time, but we're in California, right? This is a solidly democratic state. For decades now, it's dominated by Democratic politicians in state level, and all national
representation,
all elections nationally are dominated by, there's safe seats, safe vote, safe, number of electoral votes. California will go Democratic, no matter what.
Right.
I mean, in the last election, I think there was, I wasn't a big Hillary Clinton fan. Safe pair of hands. I wish she'd gotten in, right?
Right.
But it wouldn't have been my first choice. I was more of a Bernie Democrat, and that's got its own set of chaos associated with it, right? But I could safely vote for someone like that with my moral conscience intact in California, knowing that it didn't swing the vote. I mean, if it was a swing state, there's no question about it. I would have said solid Hillary, right?
Right.
Just to keep out, the other monster. But it didn't happen. But the warning signs were there, and I told people, like there's implications on the Supreme Court. Nobody thought about that, right? Nobody thought about some of the geopolitical knock-on effects of having someone like Trump in power, right? Some of the weakening of alliances in Europe, NATO, all these things, right? Look at the Ukraine war, right? There wasn't a firm hand there. I mean, he was manipulating the situation to try and dig dirt up on his opponent, like when they were begging for weapons, right? This is 2 years before it all kicked off.
Right.
There's other kind of implications, but like the Supreme Court is the biggest thing. The wars come and go, sad and tragic as they are, so you can put a linkage there between, not going to vote and ending up with someone like Donald Trump. But the biggest thing is the Supreme Court. He's got 3 Supreme Court justices in there, in one term, and that's completely twisted it. And already, and we've seen the verdicts come raining down. We've seen Roe versus Wade smashed apart. People thought that'll never happen.
Right.
It did.
It did.
It just did. And it was all predictable. And it was all avoidable. And now you've got a population that, in most polls will say, well, 60% of people are against or want, are pro-choice.
Right.
Well, where were you? Because it's such an important issue. It's one of many issues, but it's a really, really important. It's a fundamental issue.
It is. I think so many people didn't think it would happen because they were like, no, it's already established law. And then they were thinking only about their own pockets. Because I know so many people that were Trump support, not to bash on Trump, but who were Trump supporters that were thinking about their wallet and their wallet only.
Yeah.
And that was their only they were like a one issue voter, and they were talking about what he's going to do for the economy. And it's like, okay, but what about what he's going to do for everything else? And they're like, well, that's not what I have to worry about.
And even that thought process, right? Let's rewind back. Like, what's he going to do for the economy? This guy's a failed
business person, right? Yeah,
6
I didn't say it was a solid
no, but
argument.
But that's what people like associated him with some type of magician,
Well, because he was on TV and he was.
But
that's it though. But that's
dumb as a block, right? And he surrounded himself with people that are psychopaths, right? And like that's the way it works. And you voted for that,
right?
With the economy in mind, that makes no sense.
No.
I mean, Republicans typically go in and trash the economy. Democrats clean up the mess afterwards.
Right.
That's the way the cycle's been for, as long as I've been around in this country. It's like exactly the same. It's like rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. And he trashed it in the end. I mean, he left it in a horrible state. George Bush left it in an absolutely appalling state, right? Obama did a massive cleanup, and Joe Biden steered it back, more recently. So that's the same pattern. So there are huge implications, and people need to think that through, but people don't think it through. Like you said, they think about their, themselves, right?
Yep.
I remember when the 2016 election happened. I had a brother who was living in Ohio at the time. I'd never been to Ohio in my life. So I went to visit him, and it was the day before the election. So for months, we're in California around Alameda. It was just a bunch of like Hillary and Bernie signs, right? That's all we saw on lawns. And there wasn't a Trump sign to be seen. You couldn't find one. And if you did, somebody did spot one, it would be like trashed or, somebody would stomp on it, right? You'd be ashamed to put it on your doorway. Right. So it was just the weirdest thing. I go to Ohio. Get off the plane. And I don't know what kind of politics there is in Ohio. I know it's a swing state, but it didn't make any sense to me that I would as soon as I got off the plane and I got on a rental car and I started driving to my destination, all I saw was Trump signs. And that was it though. That was my warning. I was like, holy shit. This is way worse than I thought.
Yeah.
Like there's some danger here. And that was the wake up call, but that was like a day before. And then the crazy thing is the guy fucking won it.
Yeah.
And then it was just, oh my God, it was just a state of shock. Because, what is going to happen? How is this going to work out? And we saw the madness that came with it. I can't believe we're still having this conversation where the guy is a factor anymore. But it's true.
Especially this week he got, his third indictment?
Third indictment came out today. And you just want the justice process to speed up a little bit because the clock is ticking. But it's crazy. I mean, if you wrote a novel and you described this and you brought it to a publisher, right? Publisher would say, "Get the fuck out of here! That's not going to sell anything. That's crazy fantasy stuff." It's not believable,
right?
Right? I mean, it's got to go in the sci-fi section or something, right? Like, there's no way.
Yeah. Could you imagine you write a character like Rudy Giuliani who has this great moment of helping bring the country together after a moment of tragedy, and he's getting New York City clean and he's doing all this good thing, and then he meets Trump and becomes a completely different sociopath.
But Siobhan, right?
But if you wrote that, people wouldn't believe it.
I never lived in New York, right? I had a few friends that lived there, but I keep an eye on different parts of the country, right? New York's a big city, and you read stuff, and I remember something caught my eye with Giuliani years before he kind of became famous, right? There was some article in some magazine, and they had this picture of him. It was a cartoon, basically, as a kind of a Napoleonic figure, right?
Yeah.
And it was a spoof of him because, he was glorified as the guy who cleaned up the streets of New York, and he was tough on crime, and he got it all back together again. But the guy was rotten to the core, corrupt as hell, right? And he had a massive Napoleonic complex. And that's what this little thing, and I cut it out, right? And I put it on a kind of what do you call it? Not chalk, or corkboard, right? And I still have it down in my basement.
Oh.
And I look at it, again, you know what? I knew there was something up with that dude, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, 9/11 happened. Then he rode the coattails of that, right? And then it all turned out the guy made all these catastrophic errors, putting his command center in the World Trade Center after the first explosion that had happened there prior, right?
Oh, yeah, he didn't actually do a good job. But
He did a terrible job.
But, he had that aura of it.
But he had this because he wrote it. He basically said, "This is my moment," and it was all bullshit. It was all PR and bullshit, right? And
It's mostly what politics is.
right, that's what it is. And he wrote it completely, right? And he was America's mayor and all this bullshit, right? And then behind the scenes, he was handing out favors to all his cronies and all his buddies. Bernard Carrick went to jail. That was his police commissioner, right? He went to jail for corruption, right? And he was pardoned subsequently by Trump. They're all interconnected.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, they're all friends from New York and that time.
Right?
And
And
rich people take care of rich people. And that's the only people they take care of.
The argument is, Giuliani got rid of all the Italian mafiosis. Actually, not all of them, just one or two families that were out of favour, right? The rest were, left alone to their devices. And of course, then it created a vacuum. And who came in? The Russian mob. Who benefited from the Russian mob? This is not just conspiracy theories. Okay, it's going to sound like it to somebody who hasn't heard it before. But, kick it around, see where it goes, right? And a lot of stuff is coming out now. I mean, I've read about it years ago, but mainstream media doesn't cover it, right? But now it's starting to percolate up. I mean, Giuliani is massively exposed right now. You see him with all his warts and flaws.
Oh, yeah.
And he's a pig of a man. He really is an awful creature. Like, he's horrid. And he's an embarrassment to himself. And New Yorkers must be going like, he's not our dude.
Right.
So he's not America's mayor anymore, right?
No.
He's an idiot.
He's an America's jackass.
He's a fool, right?
Yeah.
And he's a nasty person.
And he looks even like when you see him in person or like on TV now, he looks like an evil person.
He does. He looks like something.
He looks like a cartoon cat, like an evil
Dr. No or something, like from some, like Marvel comic movie. Like that's what he looks like.
Yeah. Like,
the hair dye dripping down his face outside the Four Seasons landscaping.
He's always sweating.
I mean, you couldn't make this shit up. And then he was caught, on that movie with Borat, like in it, right? Oh. You're like, dude, come on, right? Now he's got all these lawsuits, and he's just like, he's caught up in the Trump universe because he's part that. That's what is in that universe. Those kind of characters, right? And that's what people voted for. And he had full access. He had full representation at the highest level to prod and influence and plot and scheme.
And bribe and blackmail.
And make money. Yeah. They're all making money nonstop. They're grifting nonstop. It never stops. Yeah. So no, all those people are horrid. But it's good that, that's coming out right now and those reputations are done, right? But it should have happened a long time ago. Yeah. And why don't they get exposed? Why don't they get...
Because they're too powerful.
They're too powerful. But, if we have an independent press where, not controlled by, 4 or 5 mega corporations, if we have free speech, like, talk about free speech and everyone talks about freedom, free speech. Yeah. Like... There's no free speech when you don't have any access. Right. When it's all the airwaves and the media is controlled entirely by 3 or 4 individuals who have their own vested interests, right? So, you get some independent voices, but they're in the wilderness and they never percolate to the top. Right. I mean, as somebody who's a voracious appetite for news and good journalism, like you got to dig hard to find that. You gotta know where to dig, and then you gotta get lucky sometimes to get the right feed,
right,
and discover the right people. And there's small circulations, but it's out there. Some are doing their best to knock on the doors and ask the awkward questions, but they don't get the exposure.
No, and it takes time to find those right sources. And people now are working 3 jobs and have kids and have relationships, and it's hard enough to keep up with what's going on in the world, if you can even handle it right now, because it's so disgusting. Like to turn on the news all the time, there's always a mass shooting. There's always some kind of tragedy. There's always
it's true. It's great.
And it's what bleeds leads in all the news still. So they just will talk about one incident for 10 minutes, but then that's all they talk about. Like when you watch, I watched the evening news with either Leslie or David or David. What's his name? ABC News or NBC. Yeah. If you watch one of those, the half-hour news station every day, it's it'll be one big story for 8 minutes and then a little bit of little stories, but it's not anything that's really meaningful, it seems like. Or it's the biggest story is the 3-minute segment of here's an overview, but
just fluff, there's no real content.
No.
I can't even watch those channels anymore.
I used to be really diligent about always watching the evening news to get, and then I was just why? not learning anything.
There was a time when people would tune in and just, Walter Cronkite was the voice of the nation, right? So he was the respected, revered voice of the nation. That's all gone. I mean,
Right.
the New York Times was the newspaper of record, right? I mean, that's a rag. That's
Right.
a completely compromised rag, right? I wouldn't light my fireplace with it. It's not good fire kindle material.
Yeah, it's like good journalism somehow got lost in all of this because it became more about someone's point of view, which you shouldn't know a journalist's point of view.
Yeah, it should be neutral. It should be.
It should be here are the
here's
facts. Here's what happened.
Yeah.
Now you make your decision on how you feel about it. But now it's all slanted and skewed and tailored to fit a certain narrative. And it's so hard to dig through all of that bullshit.
Yeah, so what was I talking about? Oh, Giuliani. Oh my God. What a horrible creature. But then I was saying, I was saying something. What was I talking? I was talking about Trump. It's hard to get away from him. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Well, I think the kind of theme
We're
here
talking
is
about the social economic and
so there's a socioeconomic side to it, but there's also like the whole like polarization. Like people have pulled very far apart, and it's become one side or the other. And so it's very hard to get your opinion across or to pull the other side back or to even, maybe it's become harder for me from the left to go a little bit to the right because of the polarization and the language that's used and the imagery and the tribalism associated with it. It's like you can't be a mix. You have to be one or the other,
right?
Which makes it very difficult to hear the other side's viewpoint. And it's some crazy stuff like in terms of symbolism that you see every other day. But recent examples would be something like Bud Light. The nation is split over whether to drink Bud Light or not. I mean, you couldn't make this shit up, right?
Right.
It's just utter nonsense, right? Yeah. But it's stuff that it comes from nowhere and then suddenly it goes viral and it's like, and people like believe in that kind of stuff. It's like, it's like wearing a flag or a badge, it's part of the identity. And that's a new thing that's got that extreme.
Right. And when did like your ideas become your identity? Like, exactly. I think people their ideas now is like, that's who I am. Like, no, it's not who you are. It's what you think. And if that's your only thought and you can't be moved, then it's part of like maybe your personality, but it's not your identity. Like, you're not like, you don't look at someone and be like, well, there's a Republican. Like, it shouldn't be like that. Like,
yeah, I mean, I've always had this idea that, if the craziness wasn't in politics, I would have always hoped that you could sit down and argue with somebody on the opposing views to you. Let's say, Republican versus Democrat. And this used to be the case before, where there were more moderates involved,
right?
And they would have disagreements on certain political kind of matters, right? But then they might agree on economic matters,
right?
So they could park sort of religious differences, or they could park, differences on, say, foreign affairs. But they could meet in the middle on what's best for the economy,
right?
Let's rebuild this economy. Let's fix this over here. Let's continue to foster relationships with these countries rather than just being isolationist, rather than just being, us alone and fuck everybody else, or, we're not going to take care of our poor people. We're not going to help people. We're going to dump them. We're going to leave them on the streets, right? Or we're not going to invest money in medical, services. Those are all things that like we should be working on. And like the US I've always said this, the US is an amazing country, right? I've never changed my opinion on it, despite all the ups and downs, all the crazy stuff that I see. It is truly an amazing concept, right? It's not just a country, it's a concept. And it's a relatively young concept. It's only been around for like, that's because the 250th anniversary is coming up right soon. So it'll be a big event. But that's a very short space of time in the history of a nation, obviously. Right. It's got history before that. But and it's made tremendous advances. It's done incredible things. And I've never changed my opinion in that respect. Like, there's some great things coming out of the US, right? And it will continue to do so. But the political framework right now is stunting the place. Like. Yeah. And it's kind of an embarrassment almost, if you go overseas. Like, the US reputation is in tatters. Like, it's almost like, you have to kind of pretend you're not from there, right? And I don't want to be like that, because I'm very proud of being coming from here, because I know how much good stuff is here, and I know how much a great place to live, and will continue to be so. But we got to get back on track a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that, the political situation is something that is just holding us back. And we should and can fix that. I don't have the exact solution.
Do you think we can fix it? Because I feel like there's so much money and treachery and deception in it that can it be fixed? Because there's so many people getting rich off of it, that how do you fix a system where the richest people keep getting rich off the broken system? Like,
it is hard, and it's definitely rigged, and it's rigged heavily. But you get little wins along the way, and they generate momentum. A lot of the gerrymandering that's going on in different places, they have been overturned recently. There's been, there's a lot of unraveling of that to be done, right? Because the Republicans have gerrymandered because they're declining in popularity.
right.
I mean, the demographic that supports them is in decline, and that's part of the reason why they're doing the crazy things they are, to basically hold on to power. I mean, it's a power play. It's a continuation of power. Do whatever it takes to remain in power. But the overwhelming kind of movement in terms of the change in the demographics, and there's continuous young population coming through that they're not appealing to.
Right.
So that's where my hope is, that the overwhelming numbers will eventually overpower it and reset it. But it might take another generation. I hope not.
I hope not. I would like to see it.
I think that the kind of significant political change happens in the US actually faster than other countries.
No.
Yeah, the political kind of stagnations that you see in other countries, they tend to last a lot longer. Political parties stay in power longer as well in other countries. I'm using the UK and Ireland as an example. Government tends to some governments don't last that long because they have a lot of coalitions and things like that. But generally, like if you see like the UK, I think it's like is it 5 or 6 years that the ruling party prime minister stays in power. Whereas here's an election cycle every 2 years.
That's true.
I mean, it's a 4-year cycle, but there's a 2 year of election campaigning.
Yeah.
And you can actually completely turn it upside down with a new president or a new Congress or a new Senate. So the opportunity is there to make change faster, but it still takes generational change to see the kind of real impact that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things I'd love to see in play that, we're well removed from right now. I'd like to get back to the order of, women's autonomy. I'd like to get back to, I'd like to get to, real concern and real involvement in, climate change mitigation, right? I mean, that's one of the most pressing things. That's the future of the planet. I mean, how people don't wake up every morning and worry about that, I do not understand, because I do. I've come to terms with it because I'm older. It's like, I'm not going to be the one who's going to suffer.
Right.
Unless, we have weird, weather events that are happening that definitely there's a linkage, no question about it. I don't live in a hurricane zone, but if I did, and I was still voting for people who are climate change deniers, then I would need my head examined because it's right there in front of me. What more evidence do you want? That's the kind of craziness that, that's there. Just illogical kind of voting patterns by people that are just locked in their ideology and don't have open minds. A lot of it is poor education, but that's not necessarily an excuse either, because, there's a lot of people that are educated in their particular field. They've had good careers maybe in a certain industry, and they've, had whatever, really good credentials that they needed to perform in that area. But then, they just go to the ballot box and they'll vote for Donald Trump. And it's like, why would you vote? In some cases against their own better interests. Because these people could be blue collar working class, right? That are getting hammered. And yet there you are voting based on some type of weird cultish ideology. Yep. And it's a cult. There's aspects of this that is very cultish. And if you look at some of the crazier cults, there's a lot of different types of cults out there. There's religious cults, some of the bigger religions we could talk about. I'm not going to even go there today. That's a whole other subject. But, but if you look at, the more famous kind of, crazy sects that emerged, I think we get probably more of them in the US than anywhere else. Be like David Koresh or it's that crew down in San Diego that put on the Nike sneakers. I can't remember what the Haley Bob Comet people, right?
Yeah.
And then, you have the guy Jim Jones in Guyana, where it's just ultimate devotion to the spiritual leader, and they'll, drink the Kool-Aid and go off into, the future with like your leader. I mean, it's awful crap, right?
Right.
But there's elements of that kind of devotion and just senseless devotion, which is a psychosis, I think. I mean, it really is a psychosis. Like people that are angry with the world.
Yep.
But even though they have so much, right? And they've had a good life, they're still angry and bitter because it's like, someone's going to take it off me, No, they're not. Right? You don't have to arm yourself to the teeth. There's crime in places and what have you, and there's things that everybody's got to deal with, right? But no one's taking your property. No one's going to take your assets or steal your wife, right? It's not going to happen.
Right.
So relax. You don't have to vote against your best interest to follow a cult leader.
Yeah.
And that's the best way that's what he is. He's a cult leader.
Yeah. I guess I haven't thought about it like that, but now that makes it kind of make more sense in my brain of people like voting against their best interest, because it's like they've just been brainwashed watching like fake Fox News and like getting all of these messages that are not true and thinking it's facts.
And the other thing then is there's this like fake culture war, and it's not necessarily fake. It's a culture war, but a lot of it's manufactured.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean, the fear is manufactured, associated with the culture war.
Yeah.
Like the liberals are going to take over and they're going to, turn the place into a crazy universe, where it's going to be dominated by, lesbians and feminists and trans people and, then they throw in like pedophiles, right? And this is the kind of like this is the terrible like word salads that we hear, and it's carefully scripted, it's targeted, fear, make some fear,
right?
These people are going to take over. Those people have always been there,
right?
And they're part of the community, and there's no threat,
no.
So when you hear like these absolute lunatics that are like standing outside a drag show with their AR-15s, and their Nazi uniforms on, it's like, don't you have anything better to do with your life, right? I mean, the drag queens are not going to take away your assets.
No.
They're not going to take away your guns. They're not going to poison your kids.
No.
Right? They're not going to do anything.
No.
Just living their lives.
Yeah.
Leave them the fuck alone, will ya?
Yeah.
And go, look after your own situation. Get a fucking girlfriend or whatever you need, right?
Yeah, or a boyfriend. Be okay with the fact that you might be gay.
Exactly. Get over it and get on with it and get the fuck out of the way and let these people alone, right? They're part of the community just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And they're not a threat, and they're tiny. This is the thing that always blows my mind. It's with North Carolina, right, is a really Republican state, right? I don't think I've ever been there. I might have been in the airport once. Doesn't qualify. But I think one of the hottest topics of discussion in politics in North Carolina was trans bathrooms. Accessibility to and not even trans bathrooms. What am I talking about?
All gender
bathrooms. Like, they were freaking out. This is 3 or 4 years. It's still going on, right? And they had like votes in the state parliament and stuff like this. I'm like, the fuck is wrong with these people? Like, that's what they were like, spending their energy, and they were like setting up their political platforms built on that type of a foundation, right?
Right. Because there's not anything more important in North Carolina to
Well,
talk
it's a
about.
distraction from the real problems, right? It's a classic switch and bait. You go to the voting public and you say, I'm standing for this. And nobody says, but what? Wait a second. What about these other more important things over there? It's like, no. This is the new threat, right?
Right.
And here's the thing. Like, trans people are 1% of 1% of the population. God bless them.
Mm-hmm.
And they should be protected, and they should be supported, and they should be cherished, and they should be not ever have to live their lives in fear, right? And that goes for anybody,
Right.
actually, as a matter of fact. But the fact we're talking about them, but let's just remember, it's 1% of 1% of the population.
So why is it taking up
How can
100% of our
How
conversations?
can it take up that much conversation? How can it become that much of a hot button issue? Right? Who cares?
That has always been my biggest
It's
question.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay.
That has always been my biggest question.
And where's the threat?
Yeah.
Like, in most bathrooms, there's cubicles anyway. I don't care. I don't care one way or the other. I don't care if a girl comes into the boys' bathroom and pulls on their pants and pees standing up. I couldn't care less. Just do what you gotta do in the bathroom and get out of there.
Right.
And I've seen this sign a couple of places where it's like, I don't care what sex you are, just clean up after yourself,
Yep.
right? That's all that matters. You know, we should have unisex bathrooms anyway, everywhere, so there's plenty of access for
Right.
both sides, right? And we should be, comfortable with that. But I'm not even getting into that subject because it's such a non-subject. It's so silly.
It is.
And it's kind of sad, but it's poisoned as well. That's the real sad part about it is, how it becomes an agenda item, but for other reasons. To distract, to confuse, and to sow fear.
Yeah.
And it's a classic maneuver. And it's been battle tested and it works.
Yeah.
And it will swing votes.
Yeah, that's just like the submarine that was lost and exploded. And like it had been, they knew, I read some articles that said they knew it had exploded within, I think, like 12 hours, but they dragged the story out for 3 days because they were also passing some other legislation.
Yeah, I don't remember what was going on at the same time. There was something else going through.
Or something.
Court or...
Oh, was it? Yeah. Oh, was it the affirmative action? Is that when they...
I think it was affirmative action.
That's when
that time, yeah.
Yeah, so they didn't
Quite possible that was the...
And so the media purposely dragged it out because, and even though the Coast Guard knew it was done and over with 3 days before.
And the worst thing about that story was, and quite a few people drew this parallel, it's like, so 4 billionaires died. Sad, tragic, whatever, right? It's kind of spectacular way to go if you're going to go.
Right.
I wouldn't mind going that way.
You would not go in that tin can.
But you might, I wouldn't go in, of course not, but I'm saying if I'm going to go down,
right.
I'd go down the flames, like, all right. But no, I mean, there was 500 people, like, drowned in a boat coming from Libya.
That was like, could have been saved, right?
Greece, right?
Yeah.
And they were tracking him. They were tracking that boat with the Greek Coast Guard and they watched it sink. And that was... there was 100 kids in the lower part of the deck, right? And like that got
barely any news.
Half an hour of news in the whole news cycle, and that's where it's just upside down completely. And I get it, they don't want, the media doesn't want to report that, they want to get clicks, right?
No, but also like if you had used the money that they used to try to find the billionaire submarine, they could have saved 5 of those boats.
Or they could have retrieved a whole bunch of bodies that are like floating in the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea right now, should get to at least provide those people some kind of dignity recovering the bodies. But the efforts that have been even still going into recovering that submersible, that doesn't make any sense to me. And the Coast Guard were all over it. But it's just, it's very skewed. And like even, Joe Biden was like, the White House, his press aide, what's her name, Karine, or I forget her full name, Pierre or something. But she was like, said in the White House press, briefing, the president is monitoring the situation. No, he shouldn't be. He shouldn't be.
No.
The dude's got other stuff to be like looking at. He needs to be looking at other material and other papers. He probably wasn't. It's just another PR spin, like to answer the question. But
right. My other thing is, why are you going down in a tin can when you're just going to watch it on a monitor? It wasn't like that thing had huge windows where they were actually going to see the Titanic. Yeah. They were just going down to still watch it on a video monitor.
Just go watch David Cameron's movie.
Right.
It's you know what?
Send an unmanned submarine down.
It's really ghoulish.
Also, why are you going to disturb someone's underwater grave?
It's an underwater grave.
And
there's nothing spectacular about that particular vessel in its current state.
No.
It's a dirty, mangled wreck of rusting metal, and it's so fucking far down at the bottom that you can hardly see it, and it's dirty and rotten. There's nothing in there.
Right. And every time they send things down, it's disturbing the soil around the boat, which is further destroying the boat, which is also disturbing the bodies and souls that, you know.
And what are you going to do when you come back? What are you going to do with that? With that moment in time that you were fortunate enough to have, right?
Right.
You know what you're going to do? You're going to tell people about it at dinner parties, right? You're going to like puff off your chest, right? And you're going to, you know, I'm so wealthy. I'm so fortunate. I'm amazing. This is what I did.
Yeah.
What did you do last week? You know, how was your weekend, right? It's awful.
Yeah. It's all ego.
It's all just like, but not even, it's like, it's a competition amongst the ridiculously wealthy to go one level higher. And that's just so sad.
Yeah.
Like if I had $1 billion, I'm not spending it on that.
No.
I'd spend it on other things and someone would be pretty outrageous, right?
Yeah.
But it's not that.
No.
That's got no appeal. You know, or climbing Mount Everest and, you know, that kind of stuff. It's like, leave that to the mountaineers. Right? And again, it's another dinner party conversation. It's got to that point.
Right.
You know, no, I mean.
Oh yeah, like even on, it's not even just the super wealthy anymore. It's like just on dating apps, like you'll see someone that's like 37 countries and counting, and how many, like, okay, dude, like, but did you actually experience that country, or did you just go and like, check. Oh, I had 4 beers in a one pub in that country, so I've been there. Like, did you go experience the culture and the food and the people, and did you learn, or are you just checking things off so you can sound cool on Instagram?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of our culture nowadays to like constantly sell yourself.
Yeah.
And when I encounter people like that, I'm just repulsed by them actually, because you know the people that do things, they'll tell you about it at the right time, in time, but they're not going to come right into the conversation. Go, this is what I did. What did you do? You know, it's all like competition and comparison, and it's, I don't know, there's something very kind of fake and empty about it. I've always said, like, you know, taking pictures, there's nothing wrong with taking pictures. I had a digital camera when they were like very rare. You know, I was one of the earliest people to get like an old Kodak when they first came out.
Nice.
And I was, you know, experimenting, and it was great, you know, to have it in digital format. You could take multiple pictures, because I never was into photography where you could, you know, you had to go and develop pictures. Yep. You know, people just, you know, really got into it, could get really arty and crafty pictures. And that was the old thing. You bring it to the Walgreens and you come back next day and pick it up, and you'd have 10 shitty ones and, you know, 4 good ones maybe, right? But then when the digital cameras came along, it was great to just kind of experiment with that. Where was I going with this? What were we talking about?
Photos and why you think photos are good.
Oh, yeah. But then, you know, over time, you take a lot of digital like photographs, and then you try to remember where to store them. You try to remember what medium you put them in. You have them on a little small disc, and then you want to try and get them off. I put a whole bunch of pictures that I took. I traveled around Southeast Asia for about 6 months once, like many years ago. And I took a bunch of pictures along the way, and I put them up on this website called Picasa, right? And that was a great way to store, because I was emptying they were smaller discs at the time while I was traveling, so I'd have more space, right? Keep taking more. And they all were up there, and I had hundreds in there, and it basically captured this entire trip for 6 months.
Right.
And went forward about 3 or 4 years later, something happened to that website. They were I think Microsoft took them over or something, but they just deleted and didn't contact anybody. And so I lost them. It was my mistake, so I didn't back them up on something else.
Right.
But then again, I kind of thought about it afterwards, and I was like, well, hang on a second, who cares? Like, those are my memories, right?
Right.
And they're actually in my head. And that's where they belong. Like, it's nice to be able to pull something out every now and again, you know, one of your favorite shots, or there was one cool shot. Yeah, so I lost a few of those along the way. Right. But in reality, I didn't lose 500 pictures. I probably lost 3. And all those 500 pictures, I actually don't remember most of them, but I remember other pictures and images which actually formed in my head using my natural lens.
Right.
And those are mine. That's the value, right? That's the content that matters.
Right.
Because that's a lived experience, as opposed to, here, look at my photo album. I mean, the worst thing that I've ever been asked to do, and it always makes me cringe, is when you walk into someone's house and they go, oh, take a look at our wedding album. That's the worst thing you could possibly do to anybody, right?
When you just started to say that, all I could think of is, remember in the back in the day, you're like, someone in your family would be like, do you want to come over and see the slides from our trip?
Yeah.
And they'd bust out the old slide machine and you'd be like, no.
Yeah, like, God, no, I really don't. Yeah, I think it was a few years ago. It was a buddy of mine got married like late. He was the last holdout. And, and bless him, I never thought he would, but he did, and he's happily married, and I think it was more important to his parents than him. He kind of didn't give, he gave a shit about getting married, but he didn't care about all the trappings.
Right.
Of it. And they went large church and, spent a ton of money on it, professional photographers. But I went to his house about 3-4 years ago, and I hadn't seen him in years. And I was very good friends with his parents. These are people I grew up with, so I went to visit his parents and know my parents. And of course, immediately, because I didn't get back for the wedding. I was invited to it. I didn't get back for it because it was in Ireland. And that's something going on. But it came up. Oh, do you want to come in and see the album? Oh, no, I need a video as well, right? Professionally produced video. And the video is like about 45 minutes long.
Oh, my God.
I'm sitting there going, oh, that's great. Oh, it's wonderful. And I was just going, get me the fuck out of here. But I couldn't. I'd sit there in their living room for 45 minutes. And they were serving tea and sandwiches, whatever. But no, I had to endure it. And that was that's the old school, like, way. But it goes back to the whole idea, like, they're your memories, right? And once they're in there, that's the thing that matters up there.
Yeah. I do enjoy pictures for sharing those memories, but in like a way that's reciprocated. You know what I mean? Like from now, like posting on Instagram or something like that, I do like a picture to go with I do kind of like those things, but I do think that we've gotten into like too much of you have to look at all of my stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I don't want to look at all your stuff. No. I want to be able to pick and choose the stuff you look at. Like when I like when someone has photographs in their house and I can ask about one. Like, oh, this is a great photo. Yeah. But like, I don't want to look at your photo. I don't want to see your slideshow. And
most of us are inane stuff anyway,
I'm not going to show you this one picture of a monkey holding like there's no need. Look at this picture of the beach. Look at this picture of a beach. No, thank you. But you really think in politics that we have a way that we can fix it?
No, I do. And I'm being optimistic.
Yeah.
Because I try to be an optimist. I'm always looking for, signs of encouragement. I mentioned the cycle. The cycle does help to reset. And the cycle has been proven to be effective in that regard over, the last 34 years that I've been sort of monitoring it. But also, there are some great movements that are happening, that are chipping away at the edges of some of the more rigid structures that are in place. I mentioned like gerrymandering. They're winning court cases at state level. They're, the counter effects are working as well. You've got, crazy Christian parents getting put on school boards and stuff like that. So it's a constant battle, but the numbers don't support the long-term GOP Republican model.
Right.
It's starting to close in on itself, and we see that already. But it's still tight. It's tight at the ballot box. It's tight it's tight not necessarily the polls. The polls don't, polls are all over the place, but it's tight on in the elections themselves. But also and one of the things that it makes it very difficult, even with the demographics, you've still got the Electoral College. And the Electoral College is such a weird, anachronistic system that makes no sense for the modern day, where, it's just really skewed representation, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Right.
That needs to be fixed, by the way. But, that's another thing that, can be done in time when you get the right numbers in there. The same with, Supreme Court. But that takes, because of the lifetime thing, and the only way to get around that is to stack the court, to appoint more justices, which is a very radical move. And, that could be done,
right? But
they're careful not to do it, you've got to wonder why. But they're not stupid either. They're not not using the tools, not using all the options. There's a lot of strategies taking place there, and there's money on both sides. And and in fact, there's always been money on both sides. And the money people, a lot of time, they back both sides. So they're covered both ways. Right. So, it's a problem with the money in the system and the PACs and, some of the super PACs from the, crazy right-wing, billionaires that are just throwing silly money at different things, right? Like this lunatic, what's his name? RFK Jr., right?
Yep.
He was a nut job, right? But he's getting money from like Peter Thiel. He's getting money from Jack Dorsey, the ex-Twitter dude.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, that's some serious backing for a lunatic.
Right.
And that Jack Dorsey seemed like a pretty cool guy. He seemed like a pretty hip dude. But I've seen him. I don't know him,
Right.
But I thought, well, he's young, he's fresh, he's probably got some good inputs. And there he is backing like RFK Jr. What's going on? Like, what's his thought process? Because the guy's not going to get elected. So I don't. I mean, he's a spoiler vote. I get that side of it, but. Why would Jack Dorsey throw his, recently received billions, right, for selling Twitter into like something like that?
Right, which, like you say, is probably just a spoiler vote. So what's his other angle with that?
And there's always an angle. I don't know what it is. I need to find out. But that's that. The money dynamics is all over the place.
Yeah.
But the Democrats, they get plenty of money too. But it's there's all sorts of dirty tricks happening as well. I mean, politics is a dirty game,
right?
And and in the execution of elections, there are some like scary tactics out there. There used to be a thing. I don't know if it's a thing anymore. Where I think this is back in the Clinton days, and this is when the technology wasn't as advanced. But they would have an ad campaign that they would launch in a particular state, and they would be operating in special. The polls would change, and they'd say, "Let's move dollars into this swing state. Let's do a bunch of ads there for the next 2 weeks." Right? This is right in the heat of battle of the campaigns. But they would have the ads ready to go, and these are all negative ads. Okay, in most cases,
right.
Let's take this guy down in this state. He's starting to gain in the polls. Right? So let's go hit him hard. Let's just have a barrage of TV ads. All TV at the time. Social media wasn't around, right? But they would have them ready to go, already created in studios and brilliant producers and editors, and they would just go, "All right, let's send this." But they got to get it to Ohio, right?
Right.
What do? They send it up up to the satellite to beam it back down again. Right? They were intercepting the satellite signals, the opposition, right? So they would get it, and they would say, "This is what they're launching, like in 2-3 hours time."
Right.
So they would have a counter campaign, right? And the money was going into this. That's how advanced it was back then, right? People don't know this, but it's true. I mean, that's how it was actually operating. But I'll tell you how sophisticated it was back then, and how cutthroat it is, and that can sway. I mean, that can sway something in a swing state. Just a barrage of negative ads for like 2 days close to polling day, right? Could win it. That could be the difference between a Democratic president and a Republican president. Like, that's our democracy, by the way.
Yeah.
Does that sound like democracy to you? It's not. It's not at all, right? I mean, yes, you have one person, one vote, although they tried everything to stop that in recent times, right? More dirty tactics.
Yeah.
So you're constantly fighting and counteracting it. In India, they say, is the biggest democracy in the world, right? Because it's got the biggest population, and it is actually technically a democracy, right? But India's got 60% of the population. I could be wrong in this. It could be 40%, but a high number is illiterate.
Oh, wow.
Right? It's a staggering number. It's just illiterate. Very poor. Like huge wealth and incredible poverty.
Right.
And a huge population. But I think it's about between 40 and 60%. I need to be corrected on that, but it's in that range.
Okay.
Is illiterate. So they can't read or write. So when you have an election, they have a very active, vibrant democracy. Like it does work in the sense of everybody gets to vote, and huge numbers do. It's not like 30% turnout. No, they all turn up and vote. So in that sense, it's a thriving democracy. But they're all illiterate, the majority, right? Or a big significant number of them,
right?
And so, how do you get the message across to them what your policies are? How can you improve their lives? How you're the better candidate than the other candidate. And what they do is they don't put words on the billboards. It's all billboards. Right? It's probably more social media now.
Right.
But, the model used to be, because they didn't have, access to TV everywhere. I'm going back, years ago. But it was billboards. That was the big medium. But they wouldn't put writing on there. They would just put symbols. And they would just push the symbol, nothing else, So it could be a flower, or it could be a mountain, or it could be a sunset. That's what it was all about. It was like, this party is this symbol, and this party is that symbol. And that was it. It would just hammer it home, hammer it home, hammer it home. Billboards everywhere. The symbol.
Wow.
Right? And that's how it worked. That was their democracy. That was their way of getting somebody over the finishing line into power.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've come a long way.
Yeah.
And it's more sophisticated, obviously, and social media has taken over. And social media is quite evil in that respect. And we saw what happened with like Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, and all those dudes, and the Russians, and the outside hacking and everything else. There's no question about it. That is a huge factor now as well.
Yeah.
So that all the old technologies I was talking about, that was a thing before.
Right.
No,
now
it's been completely replaced by other, more sinister tools. But it's the same sinister, thought process that goes into how are we going to get it over the finishing line?
Right.
Are we going to have a better symbol, or are we going to intercept the satellite signal? Now we've gone to, we're going to jam,
target ads.
We're going to absolutely carpet bomb 100 million people with like Facebook ads.
Yeah.
And we're going to swing it enough to get it over the line. And that's evil stuff.
It is evil.
That's not, is that democracy?
No, it's not.
And most people are swing voters that don't know. Most people are uneducated. They don't really have an opinion on policy. They don't understand policy. They don't understand, the implications, like we talked about earlier, of their vote.
Right.
How's it going to impact them and their family and the next generation? They don't think about it. They look at, and it goes back to, I'm going back further, like in time again to US politics. The great debates, the Nixon, Kennedy debates. Nixon lost it because he was sweating profusely on TV.
Yeah.
And this is black and white TV, or I think it was just the emergence of color. I think it was black and white.
I think it is black and white.
And it was like his 5 o'clock shadow they talked about. And that's what swung it.
Yeah.
He didn't win it the first time. He got it later. But that's how he lost to John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
And it was margin. That was new technology. That was TV.
Right.
TV was only coming out. So they didn't know. They didn't have the advisors. They didn't have the media specialists to go, you're not going on there.
Right.
At this time, unless the AC's on and it's blowing in your face and you're not going to have we're going
to shave you before you go out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And that was all part of the discovery process.
Yeah. And now they use all of that. There's like huge contingents of people whose job it is to know what color tie will make you look more acceptable and serious.
Oh, yeah. There would be to be marketing groups sitting in back rooms, being tested on what will work for our candidate. I mean, they do and they're scared of debates. They don't want to do debates. You hear this now more often. They're like, oh, I'm not doing the first couple of debates. That was shocking before. Like, no, you have to debate. That's part of the, the political culture, right?
That's part of the process.
A process. That's like saying, I won't talk to the press. There's some things you got to do, right? And that's one of them. It's always been sacred, and they've been chipping away at that because they know it's a dangerous game.
Yeah.
Or if they can't control it, manipulate it, because then they want to control it because they have all these rules around it, and there's all these neutral bodies that actually administer. But that's still not good enough for them. They still will object because they don't want the CNN guy being the presenter, or they don't want the Fox guy,
right?
They want to control every aspect of it, or they don't want their candidate looking shorter than the other candidate, so they'll have them standing on a box, right? And that's what goes on. Or the audience is a huge factor in those debates. Who gets let in and who doesn't get let in,
especially if that audience might ask questions,
or ask, especially the town halls, right? I mean, so what they do now is that they do their own town halls. They don't do a joint town hall. No.
And those people that are asking questions are mostly plants.
They're plants. It's like an infomercial.
Yeah.
Right? So you go back to what's the point in even watching it? It's pre-scripted.
Yeah.
And it's an infomercial. I don't want to watch that.
No.
I'm not going to learn anything there.
And
people believe it's real though, then as well, you see.
Well, that's what I was just going to say is people believe it's real and they think that these are their facts and their points and they're this is what they're going to do when they get it. No, this is just what they want to do so that you get them elected. And then they're going to do whatever the fuck they want to do. Mm-hmm. And it's just, you want to pause? Yeah. All right. Well, we're back. We just had a quick little break. The politics was getting thick.
Yeah, we probably need to get off the politics.
A little bit, yeah.
I could go on forever. We're not going to solve all the problems, but I think there's a note of optimism there.
There is.
Right?
And you gave me a little bit more optimism in that respect.
Good. And it's hard, though. It's hard to find it, but it's there.
It is. And it's such a world that I keep out of, kind of. Mm-hmm. I'm not a political observer as much anymore. I used to be. And it just was so, disheartening for me.
I can understand
that I needed to take a little time out.
Yeah, I totally understand. I mean, to me, it's a kind of a passion. It's but from a
young age,
but also just from a people watching experience, from an anthropological viewpoint, like it's fascinating.
Yeah.
How it all works. And how it works in different parts of the world and the whole dynamic, and it's constantly shifting and changing. And, it's fascinating from that point of view. But it can get, you can get sucked in too deep into it. So even I had to pull myself back every now and again and go, I gotta go take a walk, look at the trees and breathe in the air, right?
Or look into something else.
Yeah, sports is something that, is a great interest of me in all sports. And that's a great relief as well as a great kind of an offset.
Yeah.
That's just, and sports is everywhere.
And it's usually common ground. Where you might have some rivalry between teams, but it's all in kind of good fun.
It's for the most part, it's pretty.
I mean,
friendly.
You get some crazy ones, but it's mostly just in good fun of cheering for your team, or even if someone's against your team, they have a good game, you're like, all right, that was a good game, and that was good sportsmanship, and you can appreciate it.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's all the aspects, because I played a lot of sports as well, and all the aspects of sports, like the team component, the camaraderie, the friends you make, and those are very rich experiences that I always encourage younger people in particular, participate in sports.
Right.
And there's so many different sports you can participate in. If you're not good at one particular one, there's so many others out there. But find, a sport, because it's a good thing to have. I mean, there's some obscure sports out there, right? And I'm such a sports addict. I'll go watch anything, literally. I mean, we had I think we had the track, the race track was going to close here in. Oh yeah,
the horse track. I think
in
just
Golden Gate Fields right recently. It was just announced. I think that's the only horse racing track in Northern California.
I think so too.
There's one or two down in Southern California. It's dying. It's big in the East Coast. The Kentucky Derbies and all that kind of stuff, and the
Saratoga,
Triple
New
Crown
York.
and all that kind of stuff that they have. Right, much more because that place over in Golden Gate Fields, you drive past it, coming back into the Bay Area if you're up in Tahoe or something on your way back. That's always the road. If you're over in Richmond, you come across that bridge and you pass that track and you look across and it's this huge grandstand and there's never anybody in it. And I always questioned it. When are the races on? I should go one night.
Right.
I don't come from Ireland's got a huge horse racing industry.
Oh, do they?
Oh, it's massive there, right? And it's and it's very well attended. And it's one of the irony of it is, with all my interest in sports, I never got interested in horse racing. It's a kind of a rural thing as well, but it's actually not. It's across the board. But it never caught my fancy, right?
Yeah.
I think every year there was the one big race in England and Ireland, between the two of them, the horses go back and forth and fans go back and forth to all the events. And and because gambling is legal there, right? So every street corner has bookies. And the bookies were the places where you just go in there, you hang out. And it used to be all the men there smoking cigarettes and looking at the newspapers and checking the form. But it was all horse racing and greyhounds and then other sporting events. I mean, the whole betting thing is now gone crazy because of online betting and everything else. And it's expanded. But it used to be horse racing and dog racing. Those are the hardcore sports people were betting on.
Oh, yeah.
And people knew, we'd get tips from somebody and you put a bet in a horse. And, everybody was backing this horse. But the only time I ever actually gambled on horse racing was once a year. It was the Grand National.
Okay.
And that was the big event in the UK. It's actually, I don't think it's even the premier event, but it was just iconic. And it was this horse race that, I forget, steeplechase they call it, where they were jumping over jumps.
Oh, wow.
And the jumps there were these big, huge, tall mounds of, grass. It was some type of a tree. I forget the name of it, but it was a palm tree.
A hedge?
Like a hedge, but it was, I forget. Well, it doesn't matter, but it was just these big green mounds that they'd jump over. Okay. And in this race, there would be 40 horses, and only 10 would ever finish the race.
Oh,
and
shit.
And the horses would jockey between other horses, and, last, steeplechase, the leading horse would fall, and everybody would be like, oh my God, they were back in the favourite, and it died. So it was kind of a lottery who was going to win it.
Right.
It was a kind of a crazy horse race. But that was the only race that everybody would put a bet on. So every granny, no interest in horse racing.
Right.
Every student would put money on a horse. But the one year that I backed this horse heavily, the horse's name was what was the name of it again? It was not Roll It Again, but it was Roll One Up or something like that, right? So it was like,
I would pick that horse.
right? It was the popular favorite among students, right? Roll One Up.
Yeah.
And there was obviously some drug connotations there.
What do you mean?
Right? And of course, like, you're looking at a list of horses and it's 40. I don't know one horse from the other, and I don't know what their form is.
Right.
And it's a lottery of a race anyway. So you're going to pick the name that you like. Right, so I gotta get the name right, but let's just say it was Roll One Up. You understand the connotation, and of course, everybody that I knew backed this horse, and it not only fell, but like it died. The horse died, and that's really sad.
Oh, that's terrible.
But because every year they euthanize about 3 horses in this race, so all the animal rights activists hate it, right?
Yeah.
And it gets a lot of bad attention. But it's part of the racing industry and the heritage, and racing people would say, well, that's just part of the deal, But it's controversial,
Right.
And then in fact, I think in the US there was a lot of controversy around some of the horse racing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of deaths of horses.
Yeah.
So it got a lot of bad publicity, and it was really impacting the sport. And it's probably played into the shutdown of this place as well. I mean, it's prime real estate also, so that's another factor.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that the consortium in Ulm did actually genuinely want it to succeed, but it's gone. So that's gone away.
Yeah.
Oh, do you know what I did? When I was back in Ireland about 2 years ago, I hadn't been back there for a while because of COVID and everything else. Had my little girl with me, and I wanted to do something different, something like just not typical, go to a restaurant or go to meet people. I said, let's do something different. I haven't done forever, right? I went to see Greyhound Racing.
Oh,
No, I hadn't been in. I've only been actually a handful of times in my life, right? But I said, there's a dog track near where my parents live, where I grew up. It's only like, you can walk there. It's only like a mile
close,
away, right? So I said, I'm going on there for the night. My parents are looking at me like, what are you doing? You nuts, right? And they had similar problems in greyhound industry where they had a controversy and scandal. And it's actually state subsidized, because it's kind of a part of the culture.
Oh, okay.
The state backs it, like pumps money into it to keep it alive, because it doesn't have the numbers that go there anymore.
Right.
And so it's another dying sport. So I went there just to check it out, and it was the best night I've ever had. It was a hoot, right?
The people watching must have been amazing.
There was very few people there,
Oh.
but the ones that were there were hardcore. And it's like a greyhound track. The dogs go around once.
Yep.
Right? And the little hair comes out and it scoots around and they follow it, and it's a fake hair, right?
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating to watch. And it's over in a blink of an eye, and there's only 6 dogs. So your odds are pretty good, right?
Yeah.
But how do you know? And people do know, but they still get it wrong.
Right.
And so there's, so you kind of look at the odds and you go, but then you kind of comes down to, look, I like number 3. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And there's about 10 races in the night. So I won the first 3 or 4, and I'm like, well up, right? I said I was going to spend $10, right? I was winning like crazy, and my daughter's watching
amazing.
me, right? And she's like never seen gambling before, So I was thinking, this is probably not cool, right? I'm teaching her some
Teaching
really
your
bad
8-year-old how
habits.
to gamble.
But there we were, and I was putting, and then they have the trackside betting, and then they have the guys inside, which is called the tote. And so that's a kind of a less odds or less winnings, but it's spread amongst whatever goes into the pot.
Okay.
And it's, you can put smaller denominations on there and still do okay. But it's, so I had her. So she wasn't technically allowed, but she could come up to the counter with me, and she could go to number 3, and I could hand the money over.
Right.
And it's her bet.
Yep.
That's how you get around it. So she was actually betting. And then she was backing a dog, and I'm backing a dog. So it was a totally cool night. Like, it's something totally
that's
different.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just loved it. And I would hope that those kind of traditions remain and those places stay open, but they're struggling. They're struggling big time, which is kind of sad.
We had one in Boston. It was at Wonderland. I think it was Wonderland. We had a dog track, and one of my friends in high school, her dad used to go all the time. So he took us one night. He took her and like 2 of us, her friends. So there's 3 of us, like freshmen in high school, at the dog track with her dad and her uncle while they're drinking beers and betting horses. And they were betting for us, so we were betting horses. And it was so much fun. But I kept thinking, because I'm an animal lover, I'm like, but where do the dogs go after? Like, can we pet them? Like, do they get snacks? Like, how does this work? And then when I found out more about dog racing, I was like, this is terrible.
There's a really good friend of mine lives in the city, and he told me this great story about a buddy of his who was working with, and he was going through a messy divorce. He lived on the East Coast, and he was going through a messy divorce, but he would get child custody like 3 nights a week or 2 nights a week, whatever. And he was like, he was into gambling and he was into sport. So that's what he did. He used to go to the dog track all the time. So he had a young child, I don't know what age, like say 4 or 5.
Right.
But he had custody, so he had to take the child and bring it wherever he was going. So he would bring the child to the track, right?
Yeah.
And, but the child was told, like, tell mommy that you're going to the zoo, right? And the mom was asking, like, so what animals did you see today? And it's almost like horses. And they figured it out eventually. He was taking her, like, not really supposed to be going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think those moments as a kid, like, help kind of show you a little bit glimpses into what the real world is like.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's kind of sad because there's no dog track, I don't think, in the west coast of the US.
I don't know if there's any dog tracks left in the US.
I think there's a couple in Florida, maybe.
Oh, well, that's Florida.
And that was the other reason. That was the other reason why I said, like, I gotta go see this before it goes away, because it is dying at the horror, like it's dying a death. That's a fact. So I got a little snippet, and she did as well. So she can say, that crazy dad took me to the dogs once, right? Who, can say that in the future.
It'll be a great memory for her. Kind of like mine is with Big Lou taking us to the dog track.
Yeah, exactly. So I enjoy that. It's cool.
That's amazing. Well, here's a wild story that I want to know. Mm-hmm. Since we're on you taking your daughter to a wild story. You have a Ron Jeremy story.
Oh my God. This came up in a conversation recently. Okay, we're going to go there, are we?
Well, yeah. Just to tell you, the reason why it stayed on my brain is because my ex's name was Ron and one of his roommates was Jeremy. So whenever they would see each other, they'd be like, Ron, Jeremy. Like, or I'm going to Ron Jeremy's house.
So for those listeners out there who don't know who Ron Jeremy is, he is this iconic 80s, 70s porn star.
Yeah, even the 90s.
90s probably. He had a long
90s,
career.
Yeah.
Prolific, right?
Yeah.
But he became the butt of many jokes.
Well, he's one of the most unattractive men you'd ever see in life.
He's not an Adonis, let's put it that way, right? But in the industry, he was known as
the guy.
The dude. He had so many credits in so many movies. And if you read into why that is, because your initial thoughts are like, wait, that, like, the guy, the camera, or the guy with the boom, like, we better looking than this dude. How come he's on stage and he's, having a wonderful time with all these ladies, right? But his claim to fame was the money shot. That was his thing. Mm. He was the expert at that perfect time to provide the money shot. But he would also be able to sustain himself, like, for a very long period of time, doing all sorts of sexual activity, right? And that was Ron Jeremy. So I actually have a Ron Jeremy story. So there's a soccer team that I played with in Birmingham. There's a buddy of mine called Brian, and he was working in the city, and Ron Jeremy was doing a promotion in Virgin Megastore when he used to be on Market Street. Okay. It's gone now, but he used to be there in a prominent place in the corner of Market Street. And Virgin Megastore would have, like, they would have, like, pop stars signing, like sessions and screaming kids, or they would have, famous people that would come in and do book signings and stuff like that. So he's working nearby on a construction site. On his lunch break, he sees, like, Ron Jeremy's in Virgin Megastore. So he waits in line, but I don't know who else was there. Probably a whole bunch of people with, like, Macs on or something, right? Going to see their hero Ron Jeremy and getting to sign a DVD. So Brian waited in line, and he had posters, and he went up to the desk, and you could tell him what you wanted to write. Right. So the soccer club that we were playing with at the time has since disbanded, but they were around for good many years, and with some great times there. Was called the Burlingame Gobbins, right? It's an Irish term. Gobbins doesn't really mean anything, but that was the name of our team, and he got him to write out to the Burlingame Gobbins, keep it up, Ron Jeremy. Right? And Brian gave it to me because, he said, like, I was like the chairman of the club or whatever, like I was the treasurer or something. Right. And he was like, keep that safe. We can, frame it. And if we ever have a clubhouse, or if we have a bar that, becomes our bar, we'll put it up there in the wall. And that's where we'll drink after games. And, it'll be our little place. And I'd forgotten he gave it to me, and I found it a few months ago when I was rooting through some old boxes. Oh, and nice. There it is. So I have it at home. I've got this, like, signed poster by Ron Jeremy is not addressed to me, but it's addressed to the Burlingame Goblins. Keep it up, Ron Jeremy. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. You have to frame it and hang it up.
I think I have to. No,
I think you do.
And I knew the importance of it when I found it. I was like, put that somewhere safe or put it back in the box. It's been there for years. And that needs to be pulled out and put in a nice frame. Yes. And it'll be a fun topic. So
you have to hang it in your office or something.
I'm not sure where I can put it, but because he's kind of been discredited in recent times.
He's in jail, isn't he?
I think he was arrested and released. I think he was released because he's just like, he's lost his mind and they're not going to try him. But he's got like, some bad. He's been cancelled big time. So it's not cool anymore. But somebody's going to be impressed with it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there'll be people.
I'm definitely going to hold on to it.
Maybe it'll be a collector's item.
That's my Ron Jeremy story.
Oh wow. I remember the first time I saw him, and he was on something, and I was like, "Is that Ron Jeremy?" And I think it was my brother and my dad was like, "How do you know who he is?" Because everybody knows who he is.
I don't know. I think we should probably end on that
note.
Let's quit while we're ahead.
We got into politics. We hit on some dog racing, and now we're hitting porn. It's probably a good idea to call it for today. But we will definitely come back and have another evening with Rory and get some thoughts on some other.
Why not? I've been loving this. It's been great. It's been actually very. It's been kind of like I said, it's therapeutic almost, but it's fun.
Yeah, it is fun.
Hopefully people enjoy it and will want to hear more.
Yes.
I can talk all night.
Oh, yes, you can. I know. I hear it a few nights a week.
Especially when I'm a little bit lubricated.
Yeah, one of these times we'll have to do a few cocktails in and see how we do.
That's a good idea. All right. Thanks, Siobhan.
Thank you. Y'all have a good day. Fun talking.